I'm Carolyn Torrey. I'm the Associate Director at Aspen Words, and on behalf of the whole Aspen Words team, I'm here to welcome you to the second event in our Winter Words series. I have a few quick announcements and some thank yous, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ellie Scott, to introduce tonight's speakers. I do want to give some shout outs to some special groups in the audience tonight. We have students here from Aspen High School, teachers from towns throughout the Roaring Fork Valley. We have tutors and students from English in Action here, as well as lots of librarians and independent booksellers. And I want to thank these groups and really everyone here, everyone who's purchased tickets and season passes, for being champions of poetry, for teaching it in your classrooms, stocking it in your bookstores, and having it on your bookshelves at home. Yes, yay! And I also want to thank all of the partners who make this Winter Words series possible. So hold your applause for our sponsors until the end. Presenting sponsors are Beth and Josh Mondry and Helen and Wally Obermeyer. Our media partners are Aspen Sojourner and the Aspen Times. Thanks to our lodging sponsors, the Gant, Frias Properties, Aspen Square, and the Aspen Alps. Our grantors at the City of Aspen, Les Dames d'Aspen, and the Thrift Shop of Aspen. And thanks to Aspen Snowmass and Four Mountain Sports and the Asberian Rug Company. So please join me in thanking our sponsors. So I have a feeling many of you will leave at the end of tonight in search of more poetry, and you're in luck because we're about to kick off an intense 2 weeks, actually 3 weeks of poetry here at Aspen Words, and we'll be in 15 different schools throughout the Roaring Fork Valley for the first 2 weeks of February. We have 4 teaching artists who will be doing workshops and spoken word assemblies in schools, and we have 2 free poetry events as part of that project. The first is on February 11th at Hooch, right here in town, and that will feature the 4 teaching artists and professional poets showcasing their own work. And the project culminates on Valentine's Day, February 14th, at the 3rd Street Center in Carbondale with our 7th annual Youth Poetry Slam. So please join us for those events, and with that, I'll turn it over to Ellie to introduce tonight's program.
Thank you, Carol. Good evening, everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. From the moment they all agreed to do an event with us, I've been eagerly anticipating this conversation, and so I'm thrilled it's finally happening. Adrienne Brodeur is tonight's moderator. She's the executive director of Aspen Words, and we're delighted whenever she's in town, but particularly when she takes the stage at an Aspen Words event. She's just come off of a successful book tour with her new memoir, Wild Game, which has been named Amazon's #1 best memoir of the year and is currently being adapted into film. Adrienne will be joined on stage by poets Jericho Brown and Ada Limón. I first saw Jericho Brown perform his work at Aspen Summer Words in 2017, where he led a week-long poetry workshop. And if you've never seen him perform his work, buckle up, because he is a force of nature. He's the author of the collections Please and the New Testament. His latest collection, The Tradition, is a finalist for the National Book Award and the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the poems in this fine collection interrogate a culture that has normalized violence. His work has also appeared in numerous publications and anthologies, including several volumes of the Best American Poetry Anthology. He's an associate professor and a director of creative writing program at Emory University in Atlanta. Ada Limón is the author of 5 books of poetry, including The Carrying, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Poetry and was named one of the top 5 poetry books of the year by the Washington Post. Her 4th book, Bright Dead Things, was named a finalist for the National Book Award, a finalist for the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award, and a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Earlier today at Basalt High School, Ada addressed over 100 freshmen. They leaned into her as she spoke about her journey and the importance of poetry in our shifting cultural moment. To visit with youth and to encourage a young generation of writers with stories to tell, in addition to her many accolades, is no small accomplishment, and we are grateful to her for that work. We at Aspen Words are thrilled to host such accomplished and profoundly wonderful writers. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Adrienne, Brodeur, Jericho Brown, and Ada Limón.
Can't decide which way to go around. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Jericho and Ada, for being here tonight.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So lovely, and it's been so wonderful to move through your work through the last few weeks, and I have lots and lots of questions. I'm sure more than we will possibly have time to answer, but I thought we should get this audience in the mood with some verse, first of all. So I thought if each of you would read or recite, or however you like to do it, one of your poems, and maybe just introduce it as you wish or not at all, and then just we'll give it a little space and then move to the other. Do you want to start, Ada? Sure. Thank you.
That's probably something I need. This is a poem that I wrote. I was actually commissioned to write it as the first poem of the year in 2016 for the poets.org Poem a Day website. And I had never really had such a hard commission to try to figure out how to recognize where we were and to also think about hope on some way. So I thought I would begin with this poem called The Leash. After the birthing of bombs of forks and fear, the frantic automatic weapons unleashed, the spray of bullets into a crowd holding hands, the brute sky opening in a slate metal maw that swallows only the unsayable in each of us, what's left. Even the hidden nowhere river is poisoned, orange and acidic by a coal mine. How can you not fear humanity, want to lick the creek bottom dry, to suck the deadly water up into your own lungs like venom? Reader, I want to say, don't die. Even when silvery fish after fish comes back belly up and the country plummets into a crepitating crater of hatred, isn't there still something singing? The truth is, I don't know. But sometimes I swear I hear it, the wound closing like a rusted over garage door, and I can still move my living limbs into the world without too much pain, can still marvel at how the dog runs straight toward the pickup trucks, breaknecking down the road because she thinks she loves them. Because she's sure without a doubt that the loud roaring things will love her back. Her soft, small self alive with desire to share her goddamn enthusiasm. Until I yank the leash back to save her because I want her to survive forever. Don't die, I say. And we decide to walk for a bit longer, starlings high and fevered above us, winter coming to lay her cold corpse upon this little plot of earth. Perhaps we are always hurtling our bodies toward the thing that will obliterate us, begging for love from the speeding passage of time. And so maybe, like the dog obedient at my heels, we can walk together, peacefully, at least until the next truck comes.
Adrienne, I thought you were my friend, but you had me reading after Ada Limón. I just don't understand. I was just always sitting here ready with my book open to read my poem. You're like, Ada, why don't you go first? Because she has mercy on me. That's why. Hi, hey, Aspen. I'm a mess. So I should say when I started writing this book, this is a very pastoral book, which means that it's a book full of flowers, and there's deer and there are rabbits and there are trees, and I was very proud of that because I felt like I was answering back to something that I was only noticing was important to me recently in my life. I recently bought a house, and after I bought the house, I became my father. I was so bothered by it because I literally was doing stuff like pulling up into the driveway after having mowed the lawn. You know, you mow the lawn Saturday morning, then you do whatever you do Saturday during the day, and then you come back and you pull into the driveway and you say, "Ooh, that's pretty." And I was like, why am I my dad? And so my intention was to really write a book that was about the natural world and about the beauty of the natural world. And then I was working in the yard at my new house where I was living. And this is the first time I ever lived in a place like this. I live in a neighborhood where when I moved in, everybody who lives near me came over my house. I thought it was so strange. And they brought things too. They would bring food, casseroles of all kinds with lots of raisins. I thought it was so strange and beautiful. And they would come, and one day one of my neighbors, her name is Barbara, she came, and I was working on the flower bed that's right in front of my front steps. And she walked right by me up the steps, along the walkway up the steps to the door. And I'm like, somebody's like walking by me to my door. How weird. And she says, and I said, hello, hi. And she turned around she had rung the doorbell. She turns around. She says, oh, I'm just looking for the man or the woman of the house. And I said, hey, I'm the man or the woman. And she had this look on her face of, I think, ultimately embarrassment, because she it's hard to talk about what other people realize, but it seemed to me that she realized that she hadn't considered that it could be my house. Do y'all understand what I mean? So but don't worry, I saved her. Because I have 43 years of training and saving people from these kinds of moments. So I saved her. And after I saved her, now she's like my best friend because I'm out of town a lot for the book, and she watches my house real close. So this poem, I think, came along because of things that were happening in the world, and because of things that were happening in my own life and in the neighborhood where I live. And I realized I wouldn't be able to only, although I really wanted to, I realized I wouldn't be able to only write about flowers. So this is really a poem about how I grew up in many ways, and about my dad, and about the men in my family. The tradition: aster, nasturtium, delphinium. We thought fingers in dirt meant it was our dirt. Learning names in heat, in elements classical philosophers said could change us. Stargazer, foxglove. Summer seemed to bloom against the will of the sun, which news reports claimed flamed hotter on this planet than when our dead fathers wiped sweat from their necks. Cosmos, baby's breath. Men like me and my brothers filmed what we planted for proof we existed before too late. Sped the video to see blossoms brought in seconds. Colors you expect in poems where the world ends. Everything cut down. John Crawford, Eric Garner, Mike Brown. Thank you.
Thank you. Those were both incredibly beautiful and and powerful, and they kind of dovetail nicely with something that I wanted to talk about, which is the role of the political in poetry. So you set out to write only about nature, but invariably politics. The political comes into poetry. It seems like it almost always comes into poetry. And I was thinking about, I want to make sure I get the line right, that wonderful John F. Kennedy line, when power corrupts, poetry cleanses. And I love that line. But also the notion that every poem's a love poem, and every poem's a political poem. And I guess I just sort of am curious to hear you walk inside that idea a little bit and talk about how the political works in your own poetry.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I could actually quote Jericho Brown. Just give his response.
Do it.
I at this moment, a lot of students want to write political poems, right? Because they're angry about something. And Jericho has this wonderful moment where he talks, and I can't remember if it's on Poetry Foundation or Lit Hub, where he talks about, like, if I begin with the police, I don't want to end with the police.
Yeah,
but if I begin with my mother, and maybe I'll end with the police, or if I begin with the police, maybe I'll end with my mother. Like, the poem has to shift, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we often think about how poems move. Mm-hmm. And I use that quote a lot to teach people about when the political happens in poetry, it's because we're responding to something. Mm-hmm. But they often fail when they become a polemic, right? Mm-hmm. When it offers answers.
Yeah.
So for me, they're best, and what I'm leaning into is because I have a question and I'm trying to interrogate something and I do not have it figured out. Mm-hmm. And if I can move it through and thread it through long enough for it to shift and change into something that surprises me, mm-hmm. then I feel like, okay, I've actually figured out that this is a living, amorphous thing, and that to be a body in this world is a political thing. And so in some ways I do think, I don't want to say every poem is political, but I do think it's hard. How do you escape it, mm-hmm. right? But also choosing to sit and cherish and focus on a tree is also a political thing. Mm-hmm. And so, I think a lot of it is about how it transforms me as I'm writing it, when I know it's, something that has done the work on me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to use Ada's words, since in one of your interviews, the word that you use, which really was helpful to me, is the word allow. And you were talking about shifting, and you were talking about transfigure. You said transfiguring, but the other thing you said is that you have to allow these things to happen. And I think sometimes this is where the confusion comes up as it relates to the political. I think people sit down trying to write the political poem as opposed to trying to be their whole complete selves in a poem. And if you really allow your poems to have all of you, then the political will indeed appear, whether you like it or not. And ultimately, you probably don't like it, because people like you better if you're not talking about the political. And there are things that we've been trained, not to speak about publicly or socially. And so, this is why nobody wants to hang out with poets, because
that's it.
Well, it's part of it. It's also the reason why we're always having a hard time translating what we do. So, poets can be real clannish, and that's why nobody understands what we're saying except each other. Well, we hope y'all understand enough to buy books.
It actually goes into what you and I were just talking about right up there for a moment. Is I feel like there's something. I mean, how do you find you move in the world as a poet? Because people do find poets intimidating and poetry intimidating. And I turn to poetry all the time for inspiration, always for heartbreak, right? Loss. But it felt like, in the few weeks when I've been really thinking about this, I thought, what if I get these poems wrong? What if I misunderstand everything? Like, for some reason, there's something sort of magical or elusive, and you even talked about it, I think, Ada, in your interview, was it with Aspen Daily Times, where you sort of said, you don't need to get everything. Sometimes you just need to sort of sit with it and let it wash over you or something. But maybe you can talk about it, because it is intimidating in some ways.
Yeah, I think that's because, oftentimes it's sort of taught that way, and we have a misconception that, poem is a puzzle to be solved, that we've figured out, and, only the teacher knows the answers. Yeah. But I think that for me, that's where I try to think of it mostly like music, when I think of it as a literary form. And we don't listen to a song and be like, well, I don't know if I can truly enjoy it until I know what every, lyric means. We just don't do that. Like, we're up and dancing or experiencing it in this magical way before we even try to dissect any part of it. And I think if we think of poetry in that world, we have more permission to just enjoy it and maybe to let that unknowing and mystery of it be.
This is so smart because, people think they have a favorite song, and when you ask them to sing it, they don't know the words. And especially young people, because most of the words in their songs for newer songs are you can't understand any of them. Like, no, real. I mean that. I don't mean that pejoratively. I mean that my students, their favorite songs. I'm like, what are the Migos saying right here? And they say they don't know. They just love the song, and that's a relationship to beauty. That's the relationship that we have to trees. Nobody tries to explicate a tree.
Right.
Nobody looks at a branch of the tree and wonder, well, what would this branch have meant in terms of 19th century theory? Do you understand? And yet we feel like trees have meaning. We feel that we gain something from sitting and looking at them. Everybody in this room has a tree and somehow has some piece of truth that they feel like they know because of having that tree. Do you see what I mean?
No, I do. And those were actually really great answers to that question. The other thing that I, felt when I was reading these books and your other work is that in addition to the political, of course, these are both deeply personal. I mean, you're writing about your bodies and your struggles with your bodies. Jericho, you wrote about HIV. Ada, you wrote about your crooked spine and infertility, and I'm curious why you wanted to sort of delve as deeply into those. Like, talk about how that worked.
Yeah, I don't know if I wanted to,
but you did.
I feel like I had to. Poetry is for me just as a person, not as not as someone on stage, but as just a human being moving in the world, is literally how I survive. It is the thing that saves me. It is the way I commit to the world again. And I feel like going through something like trying to have a child and not being able to conceive, or going through a sort of a constant physical pain, all of those things, it felt like there was in order to kind of get through it, I needed to write about it. I needed to expose it to myself and speak it truthfully. In fact, a lot of the carrying was written without thinking I would publish the poems.
Yeah.
I knew that I needed to write them, but I did not know if they would be public or if I would send them out. And I had to give myself permission to either throw them away or keep them in a drawer or do something with them. In order to write them, because I needed them to live and to breathe and to be okay. And it wasn't until probably a year after we had decided to stop trying and I was at peace with that I was able to look back and be like, oh, maybe this is a collection and I can be okay with it. But I could not offer those poems to the public or to readers without having some answers in my own life and feeling at peace with talking about it.
Right.
Yeah, I just think I have I know that there are poems that I've read that have helped me. I don't know how to characterize how or what you call that help, but I know that as a reader of poetry, when I've read Tori Derricott's work, when I read Anne Sexton's work, when I've read Paul Lawrence Dunbar, We Wear the Mask, for instance, has always been a poem that seems to be speaking to me about something that I'm responsible for somehow. And because of that, I also feel like I owe that. So me writing about that which seems personal or about the physical body or about disease in the body really has to do with the fact that me reading those poems have helped me live with whatever is going on, whatever kind of illness, whatever kind of grief. And because I can live with what's going on, and because I know poems have helped me do that, then I owe it to poetry that I'd be willing to give that back. And I know I'm not really writing if I'm trying to stave that off.
Yeah, no, I understand that fully. And navigating through that, the grief and acceptance, and it is helpful. Would you read one of those poems? Are you up for that?
Yeah, sure. I don't know which one I'm gonna read. Find a real personal poem. Which of these poems? This one's real personal.
One of your duplex poems?
I'm sorry. Okay, I'll read this poem, which I actually have only read in public once. So it's personal. Hold on. Let's see. Layover. Dallas is so far away, even for the people who live in Dallas. A hub through which we get to smaller places that lurch and hurt. Going home means stopping in Dallas, and all are from little towns and farms. If we all keep heading back far enough, pay attention, keep your belongings near. Everyone in Dallas is still driving at 3:24 a.m. off I-20, where I was raped, though no one would call it that. He was hovering by the time I understood he thought it necessary to leave me with knowledge. I can be hated. I was smaller then. One road went through me, no airport. I drove him home, a wreck on the freeway. We sat in traffic, my wallet on the seat in between my legs.
Thank you. Would you like to read one of yours?
Sure.
Sorry. That's beautiful. Sorry. I love the raincoat. I love the. Okay.
This is about, it's about infertility and roadkill. They seem to go together. The vulture and the body. On my way to the fertility clinic, I pass 5 dead animals. First, a raccoon with all 4 paws to the sky, like he's going to catch whatever bullshit load falls on him next. Then a grown coyote, his golden furred body soft against the white cement lip of the traffic barrier, trickster no longer, and eye closed to what's coming. Close to the water tower that says, "Florence, y'all," which means I'm near Cincinnati, but still in the bluegrass state, and close to my exit, I see 3 dead deer, all staggered but together. And I realize as I speed past in my death machine that they are a family. I say something to myself that's between a prayer and a curse. How dare we live on this earth? I want to tell my doctor about how we all hold a duality in our minds, futures entirely different, footloose or forged. I want to tell him how lately it's enough to be reminded that my body is not just my body, but that I'm made of old stars and so's he. And that last Tuesday I sat alone in the car by the post office and just was for a whole hour, no one knowing how to find me until I got out, the sound of the car door shutting like a gun. And mailed letters, all of them saying, "Thank you." But in the clinic, the sonogram wand showing my follicles, he asks if I have any questions and says, "Things are getting exciting." I want to say, "But what about all the dead animals?" And he goes Quicksilver, and I'm left to pull my panties up like a big girl. Some days, there is a violent sister inside of me, and a red ladder that wants to go elsewhere. I drive home on the other side of the road, going south now. The white coat has said I'm ready, and I watch as a vulture crosses over me, heading toward the carcasses I haven't properly mourned or even forgiven. What if, instead of carrying a child, I am supposed to carry grief? The great black scavenger flies parallel now, each of us speeding intently and driven toward what we've been taught to do with death.
That's good. That's really good. Well, you better write.
It's hard to speak after those poems. I feel like I need a breath.
I need water.
Maybe we can just shift directions a little bit, and I'd love to know how you both came into poetry in the first place. Were you from families and communities that where arts were supported? I mean, your parents weren't. You want to be what? Just tell me a little bit about your entry into this world.
Yeah, I think I was from families and communities, but I don't think they necessarily knew it or thought of it that way. You know, I grew up in the Black church. The thing that many of us don't understand about the Christian sort of evangelical movement in the United States is that it runs alongside everything else in the world. And so if you really are a person in a family committed to a church in the way so many people in this country, so many people are, then you don't have to deal with the rest of the world for anything other than to judge it, right? But it's true. It's true. And it doesn't have to deal with you. I mean, it actually goes both ways. It doesn't have to deal with you other than. So if you have anything you want to do, you can be in church home ec, church sewing, basketball team. And then if you play a sport, you could be in debate. You could be on the drill team. You can be. All of these things happen within the church and in a networked kind of a way. Do you know what I'm saying? So that if you are on the church football team, you go to district and you play all the other churches around your church. And then you go to state and you play all the other churches that were good in the state. Do y'all see what I'm saying? So one of the things that happened in the Black church that I think maybe doesn't always happen is that you don't have the opportunity to be shy. So if you're a 3-year-old and you can speak, you have to give an Easter speech. And if you are any age where speaking can happen, you're trotted onto the front of the church. And this happened to me, this happened to my sister. And you are told, you're given in advance of having been trotted onto the front of the church, something you're supposed to read or say, even if it's as simple as Jesus wept. So I grew up in an environment where kids, as soon as they could speak, they were told, now go say Jesus wept. They would say Jesus wept because it was, and every month, by the way, has 2 holidays. And there is a program or a pageant for each of those holidays. And they find the other one. You know what they are. Then there's this other one you don't know about. Do you see what I mean? So they find the other pageant reason to have it. And they trot you out and you say whatever speech they've prepared. And sometimes it's the 23rd Psalms. And no matter what you say, because you're 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 years old, people scream because you've said it. And one of the things that happened in the Black church is because of Black history in this country, right along with hearing scriptures, with Jesus wept, with other prepared speeches, you would hear The Negro Speaks of Rivers by Langston Hughes, or you would hear Phenomenal Woman or Still I Rise by Maya Angelou, or you would hear Ego Trippin' by Nikki Giovanni. And so poetry was sort of intertwined in my church life, which was very important to the people where I was growing up. And if I could recite a poem by heart, then I could get more screams.
I think we need to scream.
Yeah. So I think that was really the beginning for me, knowing that that words created in people emotions.
That is. So you never thought of anything else?
Well, no, not really. I mean, I thought of other things, but in retrospect, I knew I would tell people things so they would leave me alone. But I was a kid. When I was reading Ariel when I was 9 and 10 years old.
Wow. Okay.
And I spent a lot of time in libraries, and the librarians, who, by the way, are the angels on earth.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, librarians.
I just, I have I really do have the librarians. I owe the librarians in the Morningside branch of the Shreveport Public Library in Louisiana, Laura McKinney among them. I would get to the library. I would get there. I was like 7 or 8. My mom would tell us on the walk home, go to the library instead of coming home, you know? And I would get to the library and she would have a stack of books of poetry because she knew that would keep me still. And my goal was to get through, because they were 1/4 of the page, so they could keep my attention. I wasn't intimidated by a page of, this is why I'm always confused when people are complaining about poetry. I'm like, it's over. you want to read like The Witches of Eastwick? You know how long that's going to take? Anyway, so when I was a kid, and the wonderful thing, I know I'm answering too long now, but the wonderful thing about, I'll say this last thing, the wonderful thing about those librarians is that they cared about me, they cared about the people who came in the library, but they weren't necessarily poetry readers. So they just gave me the books by the famous people they had heard of, which meant I was reading all kinds of inappropriate stuff. I mean, you really do not want to give a depressed 10-year-old or Anne Sexton, like when I was 10, I had memorized a poem titled Wanting to Die. But I needed that. But I needed it. And you know what I mean? So I thank God for that.
And how about you? That's a great answer. I love that.
Yeah, I too grew up in a community that was very supportive of the arts. My mother is
Your
a
mom
painter.
was the
Yeah,
painter.
and did the cover of all my books. And I was very supported in that way, in the sense that I was, whatever it was that kept you out of trouble, I think. Poetry was one of them. I hated high school, but I loved going to the library, and I would spend all my time in the library hiding out and reading poems. I worked at a bookstore from 15 on and off till 21, and my favorite thing to do would be to alphabetize the poetry section. So I would be like, I've got to alphabetize again, and I would take all the poetry books off the shelf and discover them, and I loved it. And I was a theater major in college, and at one point they said, you have taken so many electives in the theater school, you need to go outside of the theater school and take something else. And I didn't know what to take. And I took poetry again. And I remember sitting in that classroom and thinking, I'd been dedicating my life to theater, which was at the time primarily speaking other people's words, of course, that's what theater is, embodying other people's words, but then embodying at that time almost primarily words by white men. And then what it was to get into a poetry classroom and think, oh, I get to say my own words. And that was a paradigm shift in my life. And that felt like what it was to be able to voice my own experience. And from there on out, I was hooked. I was hooked.
Okay. Well, I'm getting the sign that it's time to turn it over to audience Q&A, but I have one more very quick question, which is just, could you just talk for a second about your process? Are you led more by ideas or sounds, or how does it work for you? I'm really curious.
They come all different ways.
All different ways.
For me, they're all different ways. Sometimes it's something that I overhear, something that I see, an image, a sound, something that I can't let go of, something I'm working through. I rarely go to the page thinking I have an idea.
Okay.
If I do, it always fails.
Good to know.
Yeah, I think my idea is really hard, but I avoid writing them down. Okay. And I imagine that there will be some musical moment, some language that sounds like that needs to be written down. And then in the process of writing that, I sort of come to these ideas that I've been storing away and not writing down. So when I have lines, I just keep up with every line forever. And if I get a line, I write it down no matter what. And I might not be able to service it at that moment, but I will have that somewhere written down.
All right. How about some questions from all of you? I'm going to let Elizabeth and Ellie pick.
Quick question. How do you know when your poems are done?
I love this question because I don't know. I think that for me, I write poems out loud for the most part. I write a line and then I read it and then I write the next line. I read the first and the second line together. And I over and over and over again. It's a very oral experience for me. It's very body. And so by the time I've completed the poem, I'm reading it out loud dozens and dozens of times. And if something is ringing off and off and off, and I can fix that, and to the point where I read it and I think, oh, there's something, that the music is all there, everything is there, then it's a bodily reaction, and I feel like a bell that's been rung the right way. Then I know it's done. But it's a feeling.
I just believe in this community, which is to say I have friends, and it's good. It's I think a good idea if you're going to be a poet, for you to be friendly enough to have friends. And if you're friendly enough to have friends, they will tell you, please write another poem because I'm sick of looking at this one. Or they will tell you, no, this is not good. You're not sending it anywhere. Or they will tell you, this is so good, I had to like throw my phone across the room, you know. But only your friends are going to tell you that thing. And so you sort of have to put yourself in the situation where you're going to be around poets and where you're good enough to them so that they know they can be good to you. I think there's a hand right here, Elizabeth.
Okay, if you could choose one way that your poetry would be studied around, or the context with which someone experiences one of your poems or your poem book, what would it be? For me, it's like Shakespeare and acting it out. I hate to read Shakespeare. I love to act it. If I were to study your poetry, would you like me next to a tree or something like that?
That's a good question. I've never thought about this before. I don't know. I guess I've never thought. Have you ever thought about this?
No, but I love the question.
It's a great question.
Yeah,
but
I think. Yeah, I guess for me, the way that I have found the poems that I love have always been suddenly I need them. Like I find them when I don't know I need them. And so I guess I would say unexpectedly. I would want them to surprise you and delight you and hurt you in all those right ways when you least expected it.
You know, I'd like it if my poems were required. For everyone. I mean, that would actually be best for me, right? So I'll pick, like, there should be a way that you have to have read my poems in order to start your senior year of high school. I think that's a good idea.
I like that idea.
Yeah. I'd love for people to experience them, everyone actually in the world, to experience them that way.
This audience knows what it has to do next.
Thank you.
Jericho, I just read about your Ziploc bags filled with lines.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I when I'm writing, I don't believe in writer's block. Sorry to let y'all down. I think it's more important than me finishing a poem is me having pages of things that I can then work on. I don't expect when I sit down to get up and have a poem behind me. I think I get poems over time because I'm always working on text, and I make big messes of text. So sometimes I'll have a few lines that I'm working on and I don't know what to say next. If I don't know what to say next, I don't belabor that. I don't cry. I don't look at the sky. My students, when they're doing writing exercises, I'm like, how is this a writing exercise? And you're looking up there. Where are the words? What I do is I reach into a literal Ziploc bag of every line that I've ever written. There are a few of these, and I sit them next to me or around. And then I reach into it, and I pull out a line, and I type that line. I have some lines that haven't had anything to do with that line, and I type that line, and I allow that to move me forward to the next place. And maybe that'll work out, but maybe that won't. But what I end up with is a new way of seeing those lines that I have before. So my poems are usually conglomerations of things that have been written since 1998. And 1998 is a literal, 1999 actually is a literal, there are lines in this book that are as old as 1999. And there are lines in my last book that are as old as 2002. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so I'm using everything I've ever written, and I'm working on that in order to make a book happen, in order to make poems happen. Because I think we have everything. You know, we're always sort of like looking like, oh, where's my answer? But it's in you. I have everything. There's much that I have written that I don't know what to do with yet. But, you know, things happen and then I know what to do with it. You know, I saw Moonlight and it answered 27 of my poetry questions. But Moonlight only existed after it came out. I had those poetry questions my whole life. It answered those questions and I was able to finish this book. So you just have to keep up with everything and trust that if you don't have the skill to do something now, you will. You also, you know, can't harm yourself or beat yourself up because you want to be here when it's time for that skill to be used. You just had a book come out that's a memoir, so you must know this, right? Like in a serious way. You must know that like things build up and then suddenly it's time. Like you have the wherewithal. Absolutely. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Hi. Oh, that's loud.
Hi.
So when you finish a first draft of a poem, my main question is how do you know what to take out, but also how do you know what to push? And if you want to use an example from one of your poems, you totally can.
Harriet Mullen once told me that what she does is she puts a date on the poems and then she puts them in a drawer. There's, I think, a literal Harriet Mullen poetry drawer. And I don't have a drawer, I just have computer files. But after I write a draft, I don't look at it for 30 days. What Harriet Mullen does is she tries to rewrite that draft based on what she remembers, assuming that if she doesn't remember it, it wasn't good enough to make it in the next draft. I don't do that. But I do wait for 30 days before I look at something, and then I can see it better. And that helps me know what to put in or take out or whether or not I'm still working with something. In the meantime, in that 30-day meantime, I'm writing other things that are going in the drawer that won't be looked at for another 30 days. Or I'm looking at things from 30 days before. Do you see what I mean? So it's not like I write something and then I have to wait 30 days to write again.
Yeah.
I do the same thing. I finish a draft and then I am like, that's where it's gonna be, and then I let it be. And a month is about the right time. Sometimes it can be 2 weeks, sometimes it can be 4 months, but I let it sit for that long. And you asked for an example, and I will say that there's a poem called The Dead Boy in The Carrying, and it's about a true story about me discovering a boy who had an overdose. And in that in the poem, I find out that his name was Griffin. And I remember finding that out and thinking, oh, I'm going to build this poem and kind of end it in this like delightful reverie of like what the griffin symbolizes. And I kept trying to end this poem on this like sort of upbeat, this sort of moment of like, oh, and he's the griffin. And every time I finally put the poem away, 30 days later, 2 months later, I looked at it and I said, oh no, that's not true. He's just the dead boy. And the poem ends with like, I want, because, symbols matter. I want him to be Griffin, but words matter too. And he will remain always and forever as dead boy, and gone. Mm-hmm. And that had to be the ending. And I don't think I would have allowed myself that if I had tried to force that draft without putting it away for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Do either of you have a story about a time when your creativity entered a new chapter?
I have a story. This book tried to kill me. I think it's still trying. I thought it was done, but I think this book is trying. I told Ada this yesterday. I really think my book has been trying to kill me since since Thanksgiving of 2017. My book is like, I don't know what it has against me. I thought we were getting along. She just got trouble with me, man. She chased me. This book, I wrote 40 pages of poetry between Thanksgiving of 2017 and Martin Luther King Day of 2018. Which I am grateful for, and which at the time was exhilarating but also exhausting. I had a job where it was like a job, so I had to be there at 8 or 9 or 10 in the morning, but I would get there having written till 4 or 5 in the morning. I was pulling my car over to write poems. I was in elevators writing poems in the notes app of my iPhone. And I could not stop. I thought, to answer your question, I thought it was the most wonderful thing that could ever happen to me, and that because of it, I was going to die. And I mean that. And I know that is funny, because I would tell my friends this because I thought, oh, this will help the book when I'm not here to promote it. So my friends will be here because I've known for a long time, part of people's trouble in life is we feel like, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. But I always felt like I was supposed to be a poet. And so when you're a poet and you're getting all of your poems at the same time, you really think it's over. And so I just didn't imagine that I was going to make it past writing the poems. And then when I was putting the book together, I was wary. I was like, this is it. I won't have to worry about writing any more poems. Do you know what I mean? So that experience really changed the way I thought that writing could happen. Because all of my other 2 books were written pretty slowly, I think, over time. And they happened because they happened to me. This book happened to me because it was like, now, I don't want to wait. I want you to attend to what I am and who I am. And so revision became very difficult because as I was just saying, I'm used to putting things away. I would write a poem and I would feel like it was done. I was like, how's this poem done? I just wrote it. And I would send it to a friend and my friend would be like, it's done. I'm like, it's not done. I wrote it today. And then I would send that same friend another poem. He's like, when you wrote this one? And when did you write this one? And I would say, I wrote this one today too. So it was it felt like something else was. I know there was a confluence of influences in my life. I had gone to the Biennale, I had seen Moonlight, I had read Citizen by Claudia Rankine. There were things that happened to me in a small period of time that made my writing life a different life. And I think it's important that we put ourselves in the position where we're experiencing art. And if we can receive art, then it'll come out of us.
That's wonderful. Yeah, we are suspicious that way, aren't we?
Yeah, it's true.
Every time I'm on a plane after a book has come out, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I really like that book. I feel like it was the pinnacle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah,
It's true.
something shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I felt for me the shift was in 2010 when I moved out of New York, and I gave up a job that was I used to work. I was the creative services director for Travel and Leisure magazine, and I worked constantly. And giving up that career for space and time was the best thing that ever happened to my work. And I'm very fiercely protective of my time now. And I think that what that happened, and that was a big shift in my work. And the other part was I kept feeling like I was going to poetry readings, and it felt like people were on stage, and before they read the poem, they would give this delightful, funny, or powerful, moving story. And they'd be like, this is about this. And you'd be like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to hear this poem. And then they would read the poem and you're like, huh. That's not at all what the
Shady.
story. That's not what the story was at all.
Ada shady.
And so I had this moment thinking, like, what was it? Do I do that? And I looked at I was like, I think I do that too. And I thought, what is it to actually tell the story in the poem? What is it to let the poem be complete and to let it offer enough and be generous with the reader enough and generous with the writer enough that it is complete without the story?
You don't have to give the introduction.
Yeah. And that's how Bright Dead Things came to be, and that's how The Carrion came to be. That was a huge shift for me.
And I just saw your thumb go inside your book. Is that because you want to read another poem?
No.
Okay,
it's not.
just checking.
It's not.
Just checking.
I do. Can I say a thing about stories and about poetry?
Please.
We have to tell stories because this is sort of like really a secret thing. We'd rather not tell stories, but we have to tell stories because if we just say these things in a poem to an audience like this, you won't like us. And do y'all know what I'm saying? You won't. It's true. I mean, this is real life poet being on the road dilemma of poetry, right? If I read you through the tradition without telling you about my parents, you're like, oh, that's a powerful poem. But you're also like, oh, he's mad. But I'm not mad. Right? And so I have to give you something so you know I'm not mad. You have to have more of me other than this portion of me that's in the poems. Because I want you to go out there and buy all these books. But do y'all understand what I mean? I'm just sort of interested in that. And you saying that there's a whole bunch of stuff that, people don't know goes in. This is real work. I mean, I hope that's clear to y'all that what we're saying. It's real work. There's
also the stories about the uncomfortability that happens between poems.
Yeah.
Because, after Jericho read the Dallas poem, like how do we have to sit with that for a second, right? And so if you're on stage and he's on stage by himself, or if you're on stage and you read we have banter that we have to fill because we too have just overshared.
And my job then has changed because it was my job to write the poems that were indeed very sad poems. And now it's my job for me to read the sad poems and help manage your sadness so I can read the next damn poem. It's true.
It's very true.
It's true.
It's very true.
You guys have a tough job. All right. Who's next? Last question, I think.
There are many questions.
Last one.
Hi, so I'm just wondering, do you guys ever find yourself kind of constantly writing about one thing during a certain period of time, and how do you handle that? Like, do you just let yourself write about that until it passes, or do you find a way to push through to write about something else, or do you just cope with that? Like, how does that work for you guys?
Yes, and I think it's the best thing that ever could happen to anybody because it means you're working on a book. It means you're working on a book, and it means that you're in a position where once you do move on to that something else and you're putting the book together, you're not going to wonder what your book is about. There are many poets who are writing whole books, and then when they have 100 pages of poetry and they don't know what they've been writing about because they've been jumping subjects. Do you understand what I mean? And we get sick of ourselves before the world can even see us. So the world's not sick of you yet. Enjoy yourself. I do think that it's good to pay attention to where you are in the world. For instance, if you have a twin and you're writing about, or if you have a brother or sister and you're writing about sibling rivalry, you can write about your literal brother or sister. But you can also look at in the world, you can look at Venus and Serena and write a poem about Venus and Serena. So if you're writing over and over again and you were writing these poems that seem to be about the same thing, that's not the problem. The problem is, if there is a problem at all, have you taken that thing everywhere it can possibly go? But don't abandon your thing. Love it. Be glad you have an obsession. Because there will be days when you don't have an obsession and you will be out here and you'll be sad that you will be down and out about the fact that you don't have a subject right now.
I absolutely agree. I think if you have something that won't leave you alone, keep going. And I think that if it won't leave you alone, it means you haven't examined it fully, and that you need to turn it on its head. You need to look at it from a different perspective. What is the poem that came before that? What is the poem that came after that? Just keep going until that is, not complete, but until you've interrogated it enough that you are ready to look beyond it.
Thank you, Ada and Jericho, for this fantastic conversation. Thank you all for coming.